Most of the time when sales slow down, the diagnosis is the same. We need more visibility, more traffic, more posts, more people hearing the name, more leads. Sometimes that's exactly right. If no one knows you exist, you have an attention problem. Simple enough. But a lot of businesses are not invisible. People do hear about them. They get referred, they show up in a Google search, they have a decent website, they get the occasional inquiry, and still not enough of those people become real conversations. When someone looks at your business and doesn't reach out, they usually don't tell you why. They don't send a helpful little report that says, oh, hey, I was interested, but I couldn't quite understand the difference between you and the other firms I was looking at. They just leave. So the business looks at that silence and says, well, people must not be seeing us. Maybe they saw enough to look, they just didn't see enough to move. And that distinction matters because the fix is different. If no one is seeing you, you need distribution, partnerships, referrals, content, better SEO, ads, events, some way of getting in front of the right people. But if people are already finding you and still not moving, more attention may not be the pressure point. The real issue may be what happens after discovery. Because in high trust business, discovery is not the same as confidence. Someone can find you, someone can respect you, someone can even be interested, and still not feel ready enough to take the next step. That is not always a lead problem. Sometimes it's a decision confidence problem. In 6sense's 2024 B2B buyer study, 69% of the purchase process had already happened before buyers ever talked to sales. 81% had already chosen a preferred vendor, and 85% had already set their purchase requirements. So that by the time a lot of buyers finally become visible to the business, they're not starting the decision. They already are deep into it. In 2025, 6sense found that 95% of the purchases came from a vendor that was already on the buyer's day one shortlist. That is the part a lot of businesses miss. That shortlist forms early, often before the first call. This means the quiet part matters. The part where someone is deciding whether you even belong in the serious pile. This is especially true when the decision carries weight. If someone is choosing lunch, they can tolerate a little mystery. If someone's choosing a wealth advisor, an estate attorney, a consultant, an architect, specialty medical practice, or just a serious service provider, mystery becomes more expensive. They're not just buying a thing. They are putting something important into someone else's hands. Their money, a home, a company, a legal issue, a family decision, a health concern, a future they would prefer not to accidentally ruin. So they slow down. They ask around, they compare, they read, they look for proof. They try to avoid making a decision they'll regret. That is not the buyer being difficult. That is the buyer being normal. We all do this. And the higher the stakes are, the more normal it becomes. Your marketing may call it a website visit. The buyer may experience it as a private valuation. They're not just asking, do these people exist? They're asking, do I understand them? Do they seem credible? Can I see some proof? Can I imagine working with them? Would I feel stupid if I chose them and it ended badly? That last one matters more than most businesses want to admit. Buyers are not only looking for the best option, a lot of the time they're just trying to avoid the embarrassing one. The option they have to explain later. The option that makes them say, I should have looked into this more. That is the invisible pressure behind a lot of buying decisions. It's not excitement, it's not curiosity, it's risk. Take a referral. From the business owner's side, a referral feels warm. A client says, you should talk to them, and that feels like momentum. But from the referred person's side, the decision is far from finished. They still need to check you out. They still need to look at your team. They still need to scan your website. They still need to ask questions before they involve another human being. Do I understand what this business actually does? Do they seem relevant to my situation? Do they seem serious? What really happens if I reach out? Have people like me trusted them before and been glad they did? A referral can create interest. It does not automatically create confidence. That is not just common sense. In financial advice, Wealth Tender found that 96% of referred prospects still research advisors online before making contact. Even with a referral, even in a category where trust is the entire game. That's the point. The referrer can lend trust. They cannot do all the thinking for the buyer. That's the referral gap. Someone trusted gets your name into the room. Your proof, clarity, and process have to keep in there. That's the hidden middle of the buying process. The business sees two obvious moments. First, someone discovers the business, then someone contacts the business. But between those two moments, a lot can happen. The buyer tries to understand everything. They compare, they scan for proof, they try to picture the next step, they decide whether contacting you feels worth the risk, time, and awkwardness of raising their hand in class. That middle stretch has to do real work. It has to orient the buyer. It has to give them something to believe. It has to make the next step feel reasonable. If that middle stretch is thin, attention does not disappear, it bleeds. Most businesses obsess over the first and last step. Get seen, get contacted. But serious buyers often stall somewhere in the middle. They need to be oriented and they need to be confident. They need to understand where you fit. Then they need enough confidence to act. I think there are three places this usually breaks. The first stall point is positioning. Not in the clever branding sense, I mean something more basic. The buyer lands on their website, reads a few lines, and still does not have a clean mental model. What do you actually do? Who is this really for? Why does it matter? Why should I even keep reading? That first impression happens fast. Clutch found that 83% of consumers judge a website's credibility in under 20 seconds, and 87% have immediately left a site because it didn't look trustworthy. So a website visit is not neutral traffic, it's a credibility test, a fast one. A lot of strong businesses explain themselves in language that feels polished from the inside but blurry from the outside. They'll say things like comprehensive, personalized, relationship-driven, trusted, strategic, client-first. None of those words are bad, they're probably true. But if every serious firm in the category uses them, they stop helping the buyer think. The buyer doesn't need a polished cloud of virtues. They need orientation. High-ticket buyers are not usually looking for reasons to spend more time figuring you out. They are looking for reasons to keep you on the list. If the buyer can't place you, they can't properly evaluate you. The second stall point is proof. A lot of businesses describe themselves well enough. They say they care, they guide people, they say they're experienced, they say the relationship matters. Fine. But the buyer is still left with the more important question, how would I know? That's where many websites get weak. They make trust claims without giving the buyer enough evidence to work with. Evidence can come from a few places. A client story, a specific example, a founder explaining how the business thinks, a visible process, a useful piece of education, a real outcome when the category allows it. The point isn't to bury people under a page of proof until it feels like a courtroom exhibit. The point is to attach your claims to something real. In high-trust services, the buyer is not only asking, do they sound nice, they're asking, can I defend trusting them? And that's a different standard altogether. The wording matters, because high-trust decisions often involve someone else, a spouse, a business partner, a board, a parent, a colleague, a team, or just the future version of the buyer who has to live with the choice. In complex B2B buying, that pressure gets even sharper. Gartner found that 74% of B2B buyer teams show unhealthy conflict during the decision process, and buyer teams that reach consensus are 2.5 times more likely to report a high-quality deal. That matters because interest alone does not always move a serious decision forward. People have to get comfortable together. They have to agree the decision makes sense. They have to feel like the risk is understood. So the buyer needs more than a good feeling. They need something they can point to, something that makes the choice feel less like a gamble. Generic claims are hard to carry. Specific proof travels better. A client story travels better. A clear explanation travels better. A strong point of view travels better. When someone asks why them, the buyer needs a better answer than, well, I don't know, they seem good and had good Google reviews. That's the second stall point. The buyer cannot justify trusting you. That is one of the biggest mistakes businesses make with proof. They assume proof only has to impress the person looking at the website, but in a lot of serious decisions, proof has to travel. Demand Gen report found that 72% of B2B buyers share content with relevant team members, and 57% of the people who receive that content go on to consume it themselves. So proof is not only for the person who finds you first, proof has to survive being forwarded. It has to make sense in a person's inbox. It has to help a spouse understand the choice. It has to give a board or leadership team a reason not to panic. It has to work when you are not there to explain it. If the only way your business makes sense is when someone from your company explains it live, that is a problem. Your proof is not portable enough. The third stall point is the next step. This one gets underestimated because the business thinks that the next step is obvious. There's a button, book a consultation, schedule a call, contact us, get started. Simple. But for the buyer, clicking that button changes the relationship. They're no longer just researching, they're identifying themselves to you. They are inviting a conversation. They are opening up the door to a follow-up. They may feel like they're entering a sales process before they understand what that process actually is. And that creates hesitation, even when they're interested. They wonder, what is this call going to be like? Am I expected to be ready to buy? Will this be awkward if I'm just exploring? Do I need to know exactly what I want? Am I about to get chased by a salesman with a Calendly link? The business sees a call to action. The buyer may see an unclear experience. You do not need to answer every possible question before someone contacts you. That would be insane. A website should not become a 47-page instruction manual for having a conversation, but the first step should feel clear enough that the buyer does not have to imagine the worst version of it. A little process clarity can reduce a surprising amount of hesitation. What happens after I reach out? Who will I talk to? What is the point of the first conversation? Do I need to prepare anything? What happens if I'm not a fit? These are not dramatic questions, they're simple, but when they're unanswered, they create friction. And friction rarely announces itself. It just becomes, I'll come back to this later, which often means I'll never ever think about this again in my life. This is why a business can feel like its marketing is working and not working at the same time. People see the posts, they hear the name, they visit the site, they get referred. The top of the funnel is alive and well, but the middle is thin. The business has attention, but not enough orientation. A website, but not enough proof. A call to action, but not enough readiness. And because that middle layer is hard to measure, it often gets ignored. The dashboard told you that people visited. It does not tell you what they could not resolve once they arrived. That is why the better question is not always, how do we get more people to see us? Sometimes a better question is, what does a serious person not understand after they find us? That question usually exposes a real bleed. Maybe they don't understand who you're for. Maybe your difference is too vague. Maybe the proof is too thin. Maybe the process feels like a black box. Maybe the first call feels like a bigger commitment than you think it does. Maybe the business is strong in person, but unclear online. And that last one is pretty common. Some businesses are much better once you sit with them. The problem is a buyer may never get that far. They only get the in-person version after they choose to reach out. They may not reach out unless the pre-contact version gives them enough confidence. This also shows up on first calls. If the first conversation regularly spends 10 or 15 minutes on basic orientation, pay attention. Not because every question should be answered in advance, it shouldn't be. The first call still matters. But the first call should move into fit and nuance and specifics. It should not have to rebuild the front half of your business from scratch every time. If prospects keep asking, what exactly do you do? Who is this for? How does this work? What happens next? Why should I trust you? Then some of that work probably belongs upstream, on the website, in the proof, in the process explanation, in the client stories, in the material a referrer can send before the person ever books. The call is not the problem. The call is carrying too much weight. So before throwing more effort at visibility, I would check 3 things. 1. Can a serious prospect quickly understand where you fit? Not every detail, just the category, audience, and relevance. 2. Can they get credible proof before being asked to trust you? Not praise, proof. 3. Does the next step feel clear enough to take? Not fully explained, just clear enough. Another way to say it is, can they place us, can they believe us, and can they picture what happens next? If those 3 things are weak, more visibility is not the first problem to solve. It may help later, but it's not the pressure point. Visibility works best when the thing being made visible is already easier to understand, easier to trust, and easy to move toward. Otherwise, you're filling the top of the funnel while the middle is bleeding. To be clear, I'm not saying businesses should stop trying to get attention. That'd be ridiculous. Nobody buys from a business they never heard of. Visibility matters, awareness matters, distribution matters, but visibility is not magic. It doesn't turn vague claims into proof. It doesn't make an unclear next step feel safe. It doesn't turn confusion into confidence. It just brings more people to the experience you've already built. If that experience is clear and credible, fantastic. More attention can help. If that experience is vague or hard to move through, more attention may just reveal the bleeding faster. Because not every quiet buyer is uninterested. Some are just unclear. Some are just unconvinced. Some like what they see, but still don't understand enough to act. Some simply have too many unanswered questions to justify becoming visible to you. And if that is what's happening, the next breakthrough may not come from shouting louder, it may come from making the decision easier. A clearer message, stronger proof, a more visible process, better client stories, better educational content, a referral handoff that doesn't depend on someone else explaining the whole business from memory. A first call that starts with more context and less fog. That is the work I do at KBT Films. I make a documentary-style film system for high-trust businesses. It's not just one nice video to throw on a homepage and hope the internet behaves. It's a system, a brand film that helps people understand who you are and how you think, a process film that makes the next step feel less vague, client stories that give the buyer proof from the people who have already trusted you. The point isn't to make the business louder. The point is to make the decision easier and clearer, more useful, more believable, easier to move toward. So before you ask how to get more people looking, ask yourself this. If the right person found us today, would they become more confident as they looked around? If the answer is no, that's where I would start, because more visibility only helps once the decision gets easier. And if you run a high-trust business where people are already hearing about you, checking you out, and still hesitating before the first serious conversation, that is exactly where KBT Films fits.